the Brown Paper Bag series. I am with your co-host, Mr. a.kolaproduction.
Thank you. And I'm here with your host, Mr. Brandon Lewis.
And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Patrick Tiedemann, who is a professor who teaches literacy and also looks at these things called critical pedagogy, whatever that is. And so we're going to try to unpack all of that for you today.
All right, let's see what's in the bag.
So I'm going to pull something from the bag.
That's correct.
Last year versus this year. That's gracious. You want me to drop it back in?
No. We'll get it later. Yeah, we'll get it. So last year versus this year.
Yeah.
Okay. You want me to go?
I can start that.
Okay.
I can start that. Last year versus this year. I don't know what perspective to choose to start, but I'm gonna go from my progress of last year to this year. Last year around this time, I think I was still finding myself. I was looking at the things that I may be able to do this year. Just trying to underline what I'm good at, what my purpose is in life, how I can help more people. And I feel like I found that right before Christmas. And I started emphasizing on media and doing more production. Now this year, I have definitely advanced from where I was last year. More comfortable in who I am. I've helped a lot more people. I've connected a lot of people. And I'm looking towards the next year already. So that's my piece.
All right. If I may.
Of course.
Last year versus this year, the first thing that I think about is last year, I was able to wake up and, smile and be able to go to work, drop my kids off, daycare or school or whatnot. Really not too many worries. I always thought positively about sort of like, well, not always, but for the most part, I had a lot of positivity in my life, and there were really no major issues. This year, the very first thing that I do when I wake up is I look at my phone and say, I wonder what this idiot of a president has done right now. I'm always nervous. I'm always on edge. I'm constantly looking at CNN with breaking news, right? And I'm always just I'm so tuned in. And they do this, I think, for a reason, because it sells, and it's really interesting. If you think about some of the stories, right? So last year when they had the Dakota pipeline, I think it was called, right? The pipeline,
right.
But where has a lot of this information, all these conversations gone, right? That we are so consumed with Trumpism, right? That I think that it's making us all crazy, and we're all tuned into it, and it's just a circus. And so you see how I started the conversation, and I was like kind of calm and smiling, and as soon as I start talking about Trump, this is where it goes. Well, that's what this year has been like, and it's been like that for a number of people. Now, if you are a Trump supporter, God help you, but I will say that I would ask you just to consider whether, if things are going better, right? If you just look at not only just even in an isolated situation like America, but just worldwide, just tell me how. Because I feel like so many of us are on edge right now, and it's just like we're just waiting to fall through the cracks, waiting to fall through the ice, because something's going to happen probably tomorrow. That's this year. Patrick.
Last year versus this year, the 2 years are going to be radically different for me. And I've just been through a big change in life, and it's that's the end of one era of my life, and then I'm picking it up this year. Not only will I have new things in my private life, but at work I'm going to be teaching new things, and just changing some of the things that I do professionally, and completing some of the things that I've been working hard on to try to get finished. So I think I see those two as it's very clear. That was a great one to pick, because it's very clear demarcation. That was the end of that old life, and this is the beginning of this new life.
Thank you everyone for sharing their thoughts about last year and this year, and the idea to sort of start a new leaf, and things always kind of continue to move forward, right? Because there's always tomorrow. Today, again, we do have a special guest, Dr. Patrick Tiedemann, who is a professor of language literacy education.
Correct, yes.
All right, I love it. And so we're going to hear more about just what that is, some of his passions within education, some of his critique of education, ways in which he can kind of improve, and what he's seen within the field, because he's been in the field for quite some time. And so we're going to begin with our first question from a.kolaproduction.
Welcome.
Thank you.
The first question is a two-part question. Like Brandon said, what is language literacy in education? And the second part of that is what drew you to that area of education?
Language and literacy education is, if you want to become a teacher and to be able to teach language arts, which are speaking and listening, viewing and visually representing, and if you want to teach writing and reading, those are the language arts. And so you come to me and I teach you how to teach younger people how to do those things, but in a nutshell.
Okay.
And what drew you?
What drew me to it is, I think it's just, I find the field extremely fascinating. I think as our conversation unfolds, it leads to a lot of social and political understandings that that I'm interested in. I think that language is at the center of all of our interaction, whether we're talking like full semantics, the way that you're dressed, the way that you sit, the way that you look at me and hold yourself, and then the words that we exchange. I just find all that, the study of all those things extremely fascinating. And the fact that you can then teach children and affect the world in a vital way, that's what keeps me going.
That's nice. So is it safe to say that everyone can actually learn language?
It's an interesting topic about, is the acquisition of language innate? Unless there's a severe mental barrier, yes, everyone can learn to read and to write. And, there's nowhere that reading and writing don't occur in human culture. Maybe one way to say that.
So, seeing as how you are an expert on language and literacy, I have children, right? What are some of the things that I should be thinking about, I don't know if I should start off thinking about while they're in the womb and then reading?
Yes, that's when you should start thinking about it.
So that's what I should start thinking about.
Yeah.
So what are some strategies that you would recommend for me to do as a parent, or even as a teacher working with the young kids? What are some strategies that you tend to recommend in order to increase their ability to read better or to write better, to speak better? I mean, you could tackle whichever one you would like to, but
I think if we kind of all sit back, as I think we all know the answer to that, if we just kind of look at some basic questions, like what is like language and reading and writing? It's interaction between people, right? And so the way to learn to interact is to do it. There is no other way to learn to speak and read, et cetera, except to do it. You can't read a book on how to read. No, well, how could you read your book on how to read? Get my point. So you need to be communicating with the fetus and talking, because the fetus hears the mother's voice, it hears voices outside, and it begins to impress on those voices. Within 8 hours of birth, the child knows the voice of its caregiver compared to other people. And then you need to be talking to that child and reading to that child and singing to that child. It doesn't really matter what the source is. Right? Child doesn't know if you're reading or just talking to it, or even if you're just kind of cooing at it and making noises and baby,
right.
Right? But it's that interaction that's extremely vital to early brain development and to the child's ability to form synapses and interactions that are actually cemented for good as the child develops. So a child needs to be nurtured closely, physically, and interacted with.
So let me ask you this. What do you think, and this may be, can I do a two-part real quick?
Yeah,
So for one, let me just do this part first then. I know that you're interested into this idea of like critical pedagogy. I wanted you to kind of talk a little bit about that, and,
Sure.
and how does that sort of fit into the language literacy education? Like how do those two interact with one another?
So those are the two parts of the question.
We'll have one after that too.
So critical pedagogy is founded on two basic premises. The first premise would be that knowledge and information and the things that we teach and the things that we learn and the things that we're presented with in film and in all the different media that we see, none of those things are neutral, just kind of objective facts. That every single thing that we interact with, and when we talk about it, when we teach it, it privileges a particular point of view and excludes or marginalizes other points of view. And so that goes into the second premise, that therefore no teaching is actually neutral. That if you want to look at the role of interaction and the role of education to prepare people to participate in society, then you are involved in a political economic, like a social-political-economic activity. And you could naively pretend that the role of a teacher is neutral, but there's a lot of sound theory that says that that's not at all the case. That if you go about teaching as if you're just teaching facts and everyday ideas to children, and the parents will teach them beliefs and norms and practices, you're fooling yourself. You actually are more than likely just perpetuating the status quo. So then you ask yourself, what is the status quo in America today? Is it equitable? Is it just? Is it the one that you want? Or are we still progressing toward this kind of society you want? And if you think we're not there yet, that society still has a great deal of injustice, a great deal of inequity, then you probably want to take control of your own teaching and teach in a way that moves society toward justice.
And this is going to be the second part, right? Do you think that if we were, this is going to be, okay, so I know it's going to be a contradiction probably to your whole realm of thought. So I want you to explain that piece as well, if there is a contradiction. Would you say that by ensuring that students have more voice and access and less exclusion, would they be better equipped to pass particular standardized tests? Because, and I guess what I was thinking about in the beginning of this was that because of this exclusion, could that help explain why particular groups or particular populations, whether it be class or whatever, aren't performing as well, right? And so I guess so now I'm kind of changing and saying that if we promoted it more or sort of infused more of this critical pedagogy that you're referring to, would that better equip them to pass tests, or you know what, forget that, they would just be better thinkers? Or how would you frame that?
Unfortunately, critical pedagogy calls for a different paradigm for both curriculum and instruction and teaching. So the idea that you would do a critical pedagogy which teaches children to think critically about the nature of the information that they're studying, why are we studying this and not that, who made this information available to us, why are we being presented with this? You're not really going to be preparing kids to take tests. So I could give you an example. It might be good to ground all this in a concrete example. So you're a social studies teacher, 9th grade, and you're reading a text, social studies text, history text about the development of coastal wetlands in Louisiana. The text says something like, the development of the wetlands in Louisiana has both positive and negative consequences for the environment and society. And then it goes on to talk about negative consequences for the animals and positive. Well, there's a language phenomenon. There's an ideology that's buried in every single piece of what we read and what we interact with. So let's see what happened in that sentence. It said development. Development is the noun of the sentence, but development happens by certain people for certain ends, particularly by capitalists to make money, right? So to say development occurs, it kind of normalizes, like, well, sure, like if you just teach it that way, then sure, development's just normal and natural. It normalizes the idea that we're going to develop these coastlands, and oh well, you know, their animals are going to die, but that's necessary. What are the pros and cons of it? So that's where you make your choice. You choose either to allow those things to seem normal and natural, or to teach children, teach young adults how to understand that everything we're seeing and hearing should be viewed from a critical, analytical perspective. That doesn't mean it's not a conspiracy behind every single sentence you read in your textbook, right? It could be completely appropriate, but the ability to analyze and see how language is affecting us is a vital ability in society, in a democratic society.
So do you feel like we should, speaking on the last topic you brought up, do you feel like we should still be using text to teach, or use another outlet of teaching?
There are a lot of ways that we think about text. So in language and literacy, a text is a whole lot of things that it's not in school and college, right? Textbooks are a very narrow genre, right? They're written by certain people for certain people. But text, like with a capital T, might be everything in your environment, all the encoded information. That would be one way to look at a text. So that a billboard is a text. And a video game there's a lot of text going on. There's a lot of reading of a situation, a lot of reading of actual alphabetic text, symbols. Certainly online, with the proliferation of multimodal content online, those could all be considered text. And we should be teaching and learning all of those. I certainly encourage my future teachers to learn about what we call new literacies, digital literacies, and to teach them, because there are particular language practices and particular reading and writing practices that go with each form of social media or multimodal media, whatever it might be.
You mentioned one area I was going to ask a question on, which is video games also being a source of teaching for students. A friend of mine actually brought it to my attention, or reminded me that we actually do learn a lot from video games. So we can, certain video games can possibly teach someone a lot of things. You having a little background in gaming, would you say it's dangerous to rely on the people who can learn more or take more from video games as a way of gaining knowledge, advancing too far? Or would you say it's okay to have a certain amount of controlled video game knowledge to be the outlet that people learn from?
The idea that video games are inherently problematic and that kids need to be kept away from them, to get your real education, you don't want to be wasting your time with video games. That's an unnecessary, mistaken belief. Video games are highly interactive these days, so you're going to be networked with people around the world, or you're going to be in a single-player game where there are a lot of virtual people. You're interacting with different characters. The text of what they're saying is coming up. Information is available to you in different little windows in the video game. So video games are, since they're so interactive, they are a big focus in the world of language and literacy studies these days. And I would say that my current research is based on the idea that actually I think the world of video gaming, and especially the world of VR, where we'll enter into perhaps a room that looks like this while we're talking, but none of us actually are here. I think that those opportunities have a strong potential for leading to new kinds of education.
You said VR.
Virtual reality.
Virtual reality. When
Yeah, I do have another.
Okay.
My last question. This is
Okay.
my last question. This is kind of going to be off topic of where we just were, but do you have what's your current opinion on our current state of education from a position of technology, the way that students are being taught, and if it's effective or not?
It's an important question, and one that the schools actually are embracing and dealing with. Slowly, the idea of new literacy, digital literacies, multimodal world that mixes icons and music and motion and still frame pictures, that is coming into the state curriculum, to the Georgia Performance Standards, and into the minds of educators. It's slow, but it is forward progress. The one thing that we need to do as teacher educators is to help our students understand that it's not just an add-on to, you don't just add in a movie and then therefore now you've integrated technology into your classroom, but that actually there are different literacy practices. There are different ways with language, ways to speak, ways to present when you go into different kinds of digital literacies. So to teach them as different sorts of literacy and not just kind of assume that everyone would just know how to do it. If you know how to read, you know how to to interact with all these different forms. Because that's not true. Think about if you go onto a website where people sell their own clothing. Like what's the term? Lightly used or carefully used, right?
Yeah.
And you want to sell your old clothing. There are particular ways that those ads are structured. And they do. I studied one called Posher for a little while, and what you do there is you kind of it's largely young women, and they would present like kind of that the clothing meant something to them, that it was nice, it was cute, and then they give a little bit of the technical details. And it was very short. It was almost like a tweet on Twitter. And that was the norm. So if you want to participate in that literacy, you have to learn like that normal way of interacting in that small space. It's a big challenge, actually, if you think about it. Every space you enter into in the online world has different ways of structuring the language and presenting what's normal and what's a violation of our expectations. That's true in our own lives too, right? We talk about code switching. You go to one group of people, and you're going to present yourself with your language,
Right.
your whole body, right? How you're going to shake the guy's hand.
Right.
Is it going to be thumbs, or is it going to be hand down, right?
Mhm.
So we do that all the time, and I think the digital world has simply proliferated it exponentially, all these different worlds. And so teachers need to continue to kind of get a grasp on that and learn this new world.
So, since we're talking about teachers now, my last question sort of focuses on this idea of when I talk to professors, particularly those that are within education, teacher educators or whatnot, speak to them. I speak to teachers that are actually in the classroom now, or they may have been in from 1 year to 5 years or whatnot, right? And it's really interesting when you have these conversations. And even when I talk to parents, some parents have the same idea. It's like, that they want a critical education for their child. They want their children to be able to challenge, right, and to be able to explore, to be able to question, right, because that's going to lead to like more discovery and so forth, right. And so that's a typical conversation that I've gotten into numerous amounts of times, right. My question would be is, why do you think that we're still having those conversations as opposed to the application? Where are we? Why is it seems like we've been having these, and if you look back, like, if you go back and like read even the early, 1900s, or if you, we could go back and even further than that, right? It seems like we're continuing to have the same conversations, each generation. We're just putting forth more research and we're expanding those conversations, but it's like, at what point do we say, you know what? We actually have a good system now. Like, why are we still struggling? And I'm going to put it into an American context. What do you think the issue is?
Much of what you're talking about, I think, is connected to different movements for social justice. So whether it was suffrage for women's voting, or rights in equal treatment for African Americans, or the women's movement. So in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we're all kind of aware that those were radical times, right? They're radical. And I'll tell you the honest truth, I think that society, that the powers that be, the status quo, worked extremely hard to suppress that radicalism. It worked really hard, Look at the Reagan age. The Reagan age was time to go back to sleep, everybody. That was horrible what we just went through with all those people wanting to change society and protesting.
Right.
It's morning again in America. You can just go to your job and rest and drive your caddy around and
Right.
not worry about that. So society works pretty hard. And so, again, it's not a conspiracy of 8 guys in a back room, 8 white men with cigars, we're going to put them back to sleep. But it's just kind of the inertia of the capitalist system and the socioeconomic system that we have in our society, that every time we push forward, the system wants to kind of, it's almost like a wave comes out of a trough and then it just sucks back in. And so I think we're in a time period where there hasn't been a lot of embrace of critical analysis of society, of the rights of people, of the trampling of people's civil rights, until we've seen the most recent movements with Black Lives Matter and some of the anti-Trump activism. I think we finally have gotten to a point where people are beginning to kind of push back on the status quo again. And so the education simply follows the patterns of society. So education ebbs and flows like that as well.
Do you think we'll ever get to a point to where we sort of cease the idea of we're going to create these robots, right? So there's robots within citizenship, or and more so to critical thinkers? Do you think we'll get to that place to where we can do that? We'll do that on a mass scale, or do you think we're going to stay in more of a workforce sort of mentality, the factory education, where we kind of come in and we're trained to be workers? Right? Do you think that we're going to get to this place that so many of us want, to where we're actually developing this critical
the form of the educational system reflects the economic form. So it's a capitalist system, and we have an educational system that serves that capitalist system. It's as simple as that. It serves to produce workers. Why do you grade people? What's the purpose of a grade? You're going to make C people, you're going to make B people, and you're going to slot them into society. What role are they going to play? So
and they have fulfillment out of those grades too. Like they have this certain thing that they've been programmed to think about that.
Do
right?
you really think that the capitalist society and those who benefit from it really want every kid coming out of school with the ability to kind of fight and reject the injustice of the workplace and work for social justice in the workplace and worker rights, and change it into a collective where everyone equally shares in the profit of the corporation? That's not what the capitalists want, and that's not the education that they're providing. And the Donald Trump White House, if they have any plan at all, which I don't actually think they do, it's a huge step back in that direction.
All right, so again, we would like to thank Dr. Patrick Tiedemann for joining us here today. Discussed a lot regarding education, video gaming, critical pedagogy, the ways in which we try to create and expound upon the way that we think, particularly try to be more critical, and so we're really appreciative of that. So we're going to close out our show with Cola's last segment.
Normally this is a part of the show where we ask our guests if you have a book of the week that you recommend for the people, or that you have yourself, and I think you have a book yourself, am I correct?
I'd rather not talk about the work I did. My latest work is largely a long exposition of what we just. This would be the abstract in a way of what I wrote in my latest chapter. But the book that I would recommend that people read is one that highly influenced me as a young teacher. It's called Life in Schools by Peter McLaren. And Peter McLaren was a young guy, somewhat like me, came out of teacher ed program. He's going to make change in the world. He's going to go out there and help these poor downtrodden kids. And he got out there and he found out that was just like his white liberal idealism. Man, he found a world in the Toronto corridor of extreme poverty and social upheaval, and he had to learn. He wanted to figure out, why is it like this? So my schooling did not prepare me for this. So the first half of his book is his diary from his first year of teaching, and there's a lot of heartaches, and there's a lot of laughs in there, things that happened to him. And then the second half is an introduction to critical pedagogy and the fundamental thinkers in the field of critical pedagogy who begin to give answers for why schools look the way they do, why students are enfranchised or disenfranchised, and a wide range of other ideas that really meant a lot to me and began to explain a lot of what I was seeing as well, and kind of pushed me in a direction that, as you can see, still means a lot to me today.
So fight the power. All right. Thank you so much for joining us again, Dr. Tiedemann, and we hope that you enjoyed this week of Brown Paper Bag.
Next week.